Her phone lit up with a tender anniversary message at 9:47 in the morning, and by 9:49, her marriage had already begun to collapse. Through the glass partition of her own restaurant in downtown Chicago, Emma Collins watched her husband kiss another woman with the ease of a man who had nothing to hide. Harbor Table was quiet at that hour, sunlight filtering through tall windows and stretching across polished oak floors, the scent of simmering tomato sauce and fresh bread rising gently from the kitchen. Emma stood in the narrow hallway outside her office, her hand still wrapped around her phone, Daniel's words glowing on the screen. "Happy anniversary, Em. Stuck at the construction site all day. Tonight is ours. Love you." The message was warm, familiar, carefully ordinary. Yet only 30 feet away, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his navy jacket catching the light, his hand sliding up the cheek of a red-haired woman as if he had memorized every curve of her face. Emma did not move at first. The world seemed to hesitate with her suspended between truth and denial. She studied the way Daniel tilted his head, the faint scar near his eyebrow she had once kissed after he told her about a childhood accident. She recognized the rhythm of his laughter, low and confident, the way his shoulders relaxed when he felt admired. He looked comfortable, intimate, not like a man trapped at work, not like a husband counting the hours until he could celebrate 2 years of marriage. Her heart did not shatter loudly. It tightened, slowly, deliberately. The red-haired woman leaned closer, whispering something that made Daniel grin, and then she kissed him again, this time deeper, her fingers gripping his collar. It was not a mistake, not a misunderstanding. It was practiced. Emma felt heat rush through her chest, her pulse pounding so violently she could hear it in her ears. 2 years of shared mornings, late-night conversations, whispered promises about the future suddenly felt like fragile glass beneath her feet. She pushed the office door open, ready to cross the dining room and demand answers in front of every customer seated beneath the hanging Edison bulbs. Anger propelled her forward, fierce and immediate. But before she could take more than a single step, a steady hand closed around her wrist. Detective Laura Bennett, off duty, but sharp-eyed as ever, had been sitting at the counter finishing a cup of coffee. She had seen everything. "Wait," Laura murmured, her voice low but firm. "If you walk out there now, you will get excuses, and you will lose the advantage." Emma's breath came uneven, her vision blurring at the edges. "He told me he was at work," she whispered, as if saying it aloud might rewrite reality. Laura's gaze did not soften. "And if he is bold enough to lie to you in your own restaurant," she said quietly, "then this is not just about an affair." That sentence landed harder than the kiss itself. Emma turned back toward the glass, her anger cooling into something far more controlled. Daniel stood up, tossing cash on the table without looking back, the red-haired woman smoothing her coat before slipping her arm through his. And then Emma recognized her. Lily Carter, her younger sister, 28 years old. The girl who used to crawl into Emma's bed during thunderstorms, clutching her hand in the dark and trusting her to keep monsters away. The realization did not explode. It hollowed her out from within. Betrayal from a husband cut deep. Betrayal from blood cut deeper. The city outside continued its restless motion car horns, echoing faintly, the distant rumble of the elevated train vibrating through the building. Inside, Harbor Table servers moved between tables, unaware that something irreversible had just shifted. Emma felt the strange clarity that sometimes follows devastation. She had built this restaurant from nothing, negotiating contracts, outmaneuvering suppliers, rebuilding a failing business into a respected name on the Chicago dining scene. Investors had once dismissed her as too young, too soft-spoken. She had proven them wrong without ever raising her voice. Daniel had married the quiet woman who preferred handwritten menus and early mornings at the farmer's market. He had forgotten that quiet did not mean weak. He had forgotten that Emma Collins understood strategy. As he walked out the door with Lily at his side, Never once glancing toward the office window, Emma lowered her phone slowly. The anniversary message still glowed in her palm. Love you. Her lips curved not in sorrow, not in forgiveness, but in something colder, steadier. Calculation. She would not confront him today. She would not scream or beg. She would gather truth like evidence piece by piece. And when the time came, Daniel Collins would discover that the woman he believed he had deceived was far more powerful than he had ever imagined. Emma did not confront him that night. She drove home with her hands steady on the steering wheel and her mind already sharpening into strategy. By the time Daniel walked through the front door at 7:20 in the evening carrying a bottle of wine and a rehearsed smile, she had washed her face, changed into soft gray cashmere, and laid the table as if nothing in the world had fractured. He kissed her cheek lightly, careful, almost distracted. Traffic was insane, he said, loosening his tie, eyes skimming past her instead of into her. She watched him the way an architect studies cracks in a foundation, searching for stress points. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to his jacket. Not hers. Not Chicago wind. Something floral and sweet. He spoke about delays at the construction site, about a supplier mistake, about numbers that needed adjusting. Lies layered gently over lies. Emma nodded in the right places, her expression soft, her questions measured. Inside her, thoughts were no longer emotional. They were analytical. Later, when Daniel fell asleep just after 10:30, his breathing deep and untroubled, Emma lay beside him staring at the ceiling. 2 years of marriage, hundreds of shared dinners, thousands of words exchanged in trust. She replayed the image of Lily's hand resting on his chest, the intimacy unguarded. It would have been easier if it were only betrayal of the body. But Lily meant infiltration, access. Someone close enough to gather information, close enough to know Harbor Table's valuation, her contracts, her expansion plans. Emma turned her head slowly and looked at Daniel in the dark. The man she married had underestimated the woman beside him. At 12:15 in the morning, she slipped from the bed silently and walked to Daniel's home office. The room smelled faintly of leather and printer ink, orderly masculine, curated to project discipline. She had never invaded this space before. Marriage had made such boundaries unnecessary. Tonight, necessity rewrote the rules. She opened the desk drawer first. Nothing unusual. Construction blueprints, tax folders, receipts. Her pulse remained calm. Then she powered on his laptop. The password prompt glowed. She hesitated only 1 second before typing Harbor 2 years. It opened. Her stomach did not lurch. She had expected carelessness. She found it. The desktop was clean, minimal. She opened his email. Hundreds of messages flooded the screen. She skimmed quickly, eyes trained to filter noise from Signal. Then one subject line froze her hand. Final valuation discussion. The email thread stretched back 4 months. Daniel and a name she recognized immediately. Victor Hale, private equity investor known for aggressive acquisitions across the Midwest. The messages were not casual. They were strategic. Victor wrote about a potential purchase price of $3 million for Harbor Table once controlling authority was secured. Daniel's reply was short, calculated. She is tired. She trusts me. Once the paperwork is signed, it will be seamless. Emma felt the air leave her lungs slowly, not in shock, but in confirmation. She scrolled further. Drafts of a power of attorney document. A business transfer agreement listing Daniel Collins as primary decision authority in the event of medical incapacity. Her name typed neatly under signature lines she had never signed. Dates discussed, deadlines referenced. One message from Victor read, "We must ensure she is compliant before fourth quarter. Delays will cost us leverage." Daniel had responded. "Leave that to me." Emma leaned back in the chair, her hands resting lightly on the desk. The affair was not a distraction. It was part of architecture, emotional destabilization, isolation, undermining her confidence. Lily's presence suddenly made strategic sense. A sister's influence carried weight. A sister's betrayal created confusion. Confusion weakened resistance. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. A message from Lily. "Lunch tomorrow. Miss you." The audacity almost impressed her. Emma stared at the text for several seconds before typing back, "Of course." She added a small heart emoji and set the phone down gently. She would not react. She would gather. Before shutting the laptop, she searched Victor Hale. Articles surfaced quickly. Hostile takeovers, leveraged buyouts, businesses absorbed and dismantled. A pattern emerged: partner with an insider, destabilize leadership, acquire at reduced value. Harbor Table was not just a restaurant. It was real estate in a prime Chicago corridor. It was a brand. It was leverage. Emma closed the laptop and turned off the light. In the dark hallway, her reflection in the mirror looked composed, almost serene. The woman who had been humiliated through a glass partition that morning was gone. In her place stood someone colder, clearer. Daniel believed he was orchestrating a quiet takeover. Victor believed he was negotiating with a weak spouse. Lily believed she was choosing passion over loyalty. None of them understood that Emma Collins had just stepped onto the same chessboard, and she did not intend to lose. The sickness began in November, subtle enough to dismiss, persistent enough to linger like a shadow. Emma Collins had blamed the long hours first, the pressure of expansion plans second, and finally the Chicago winter that seemed to settle into her bones without permission. Every morning she woke with a sour ache in her stomach, a wave of nausea that crested just after her first sip of coffee. By 9, she would steady herself against the stainless steel counter in Harbor Table's kitchen, breathing through dizziness while servers pretended not to notice the owner gripping the edge of the world. Daniel had noticed, of course. He had been attentive, too attentive. He insisted on making her coffee each morning, appearing in the kitchen with a gentle smile and a mug prepared exactly the way she liked it. Almond milk, no sugar, steam curling upward like a quiet offering. "You work too hard," he would murmur, brushing his thumb across her wrist. "Let me take care of you." Emma remembered how comforted she once felt by that sentence. Now, in hindsight, the memory tasted metallic. The nausea worsened over 3 months. By January, she had lost weight without trying, her collarbones sharper beneath silk blouses, her energy thinning to threads by mid-afternoon. Her doctor ran tests, blood panels, thyroid screenings, stress markers. Everything returned normal. Perhaps anxiety, the physician suggested gently. Perhaps burnout. Emma nodded, then accepting the explanation because it was easier than imagining something deliberate. She had trusted her body less than she trusted her husband. It was not a dramatic revelation that changed everything. It was a detail. One morning in early February, Emma descended the stairs quietly after realizing she had forgotten her phone upstairs. Daniel stood at the kitchen island, his back to her, holding a small brown bottle between his fingers. He tilted it over her coffee mug and shook it lightly. Clear liquid slipped into dark coffee without resistance. He capped the bottle quickly and slid it into his pocket just as she stepped fully into view. "Morning," he said smoothly, lifting the mug toward her with the same practiced warmth. "You look pale. Drink this before you go." Emma took the mug. She even lifted it to her lips. But she did not swallow. Instead, she inhaled. Beneath the familiar bitterness of roasted beans was something else, faint but sharp, medicinal, intrusive. She smiled at him and set the cup down beside the sink. "I forgot my planner upstairs," she said casually. "I'll be right back." In the bathroom, she poured the coffee into a clean glass jar, sealed it tightly, and hid it inside her tote bag. Her hands did not tremble. Her pulse did not spike. Something inside her had already hardened. She had spent months believing she was weak. Now she felt something entirely different. Clarity. That afternoon, she drove to a private laboratory recommended quietly by Nathan Brooks, the investigator she had recently hired. She explained little. "A toxicology screening," she said simply. "Comprehensive." The technician did not ask questions. 72 hours later, the call came. Ipecac syrup detected. 15 milliliters per standard cup. The words settled into silence on the other end of the line. Ipecac. A substance designed to induce vomiting, not lethal in small doses, but destructive when administered consistently over time. Chronic nausea, dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, weakness, compliance. Emma ended the call and sat alone in her office at Harbor Table, the restaurant humming just beyond the door, unaware that its owner had just confirmed attempted sabotage of her own body. 3 months. Roughly 90 days. Each morning, Daniel had kissed her forehead, handed her a mug, and slowly dismantled her strength. The betrayal shifted shape in her mind. This was no longer about infidelity. It was engineering. That evening, Daniel asked if she felt better. He reached for her hand across the dinner table, eyes soft with counterfeit concern. "You should take a few days off," he suggested gently. "Let me handle things." Emma looked at him and saw not a husband but a strategist calculating outcomes. She squeezed his hand back and smiled. "I feel much stronger lately," she said quietly. "Almost like myself again." Daniel smiled, unaware of the meaning beneath her words. He believed she was still deteriorating. He believed she was still unaware. He did not know that Emma Collins had just discovered the method behind her decline. And he certainly did not know that from this point forward, every move he made would be watched, measured, and documented. The woman he had tried to weaken was no longer sick. She was awake. Emma did not report Daniel to the police the day she received the toxicology results. She did something far more dangerous. She chose patience. Rage would have satisfied her pride, but patience would dismantle him piece by piece. Sitting in her office at Harbor Table, the late afternoon sun stretching across the hardwood floor, she laid the lab report flat on her desk and stared at the clinical language describing what her husband had been doing to her body for nearly 3 months. Ipecac syrup detected. Consistent exposure. Progressive weakness. The words were sterile, emotionless, but the implication roared. He had not been careless. He had been systematic. That evening, she called Richard Hayes, the attorney who had handled the lease renegotiation for Harbor Table 5 years earlier when the bank had tried to pressure her into surrendering half her equity. Richard was 60 years old, precise and allergic to incompetence. He answered on the second ring. Emma rarely called him without preparation. "I need to activate the family trust," she said calmly. There was a pause on the line, the sound of paper shifting. The trust was established by her grandmother nearly 10 years ago, a protected reserve of $900,000 intended only for circumstances involving coercion, fraud, or threat to ownership. "Are we there?" Richard asked quietly. Emma did not hesitate. "We are past there." The next 48 hours unfolded with careful coordination. Richard filed emergency motions to freeze any pending transfer of authority connected to Harbor Table. He initiated a confidential review of Daniel's financial records through legal channels Emma had not even known existed. Meanwhile, Nathan Brooks intensified his investigation into Victor Hale tracing shell companies' subsidiary accounts and suspicious timing in recent acquisitions. Patterns emerged quickly. Businesses destabilized internally before acquisition. Personal relationships exploited. Medical vulnerabilities leveraged. Daniel had not improvised this scheme. He had followed a template. At home, Emma's performance continued flawlessly. She accepted Daniel's morning coffee without drinking it, pouring each cup discreetly into a sealed container for documentation. She allowed him to comment on her weight, on her supposed exhaustion, on how she should step back from daily operations. "You deserve rest," he would say gently, eyes scanning her face for signs of collapse. Emma met his gaze evenly and nodded as though surrendering. In reality, she was collecting timestamps, preserving samples, building a case that no defense attorney could easily dismantle. On Thursday evening, while Daniel showered, her phone vibrated with a secure message from Nathan. Attached was an audio file extracted from Daniel's work voicemail through a warrant Richard had quietly secured. Emma sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play. Victor Hale's voice came through, first smooth, controlled, faintly impatient. "We need her compliant before the end of third quarter." Daniel responded with a low chuckle. "She's weaker every week. By October, she won't fight anything." The sentence hung in the room like smoke. Emma stopped the recording and set the phone down slowly. October. They had assigned her a timeline, a projected deterioration, an expiration date. For a brief moment, emotion threatened to surface grief for the marriage she thought she had for the sister who had aligned herself with this machinery. But grief had no strategic value. She inhaled once and stood. The following morning, she met Laura Bennett in a quiet conference room at a private law office rather than a police station. Laura listened without interrupting as Emma laid out the lab report, the emails, the financial drafts, and finally the audio recording. The detective's jaw tightened incrementally with each piece. "This is attempted homicide territory," Laura said evenly. Emma nodded. "I know, but I want them certain I am still unaware." Laura studied her carefully, then not as a victim, but as an equal. "That requires nerve," she said. Emma's response was simple. "I built Harbor Table from nothing. I can build this case the same way." That night, Daniel slept beside her with the calm of a man convinced his plan was unfolding exactly as designed. Lily texted affectionate messages filled with hollow, sisterly warmth. Victor likely calculated profit margins in some glass tower downtown. None of them understood that the ground had shifted irrevocably. The trust was activated. The assets were secured. The evidence was mounting. Emma lay awake in the dark, not fragile, not frightened, but sharpened. They had tried to weaken her body to seize her empire. Instead, they had forged something colder inside her. And now she would decide when the collapse would begin. The plan to kill her was not discovered in a dramatic confession or a careless message. It arrived in a grainy audio file sent at 2:13 in the afternoon on a gray Tuesday, when Chicago's skyline looked as cold as steel. Emma sat alone in her office, the hum of Harbor Table filtering faintly through the walls, and pressed play without knowing that what she was about to hear would redraw the boundaries of her marriage entirely. Victor Hale's voice came first crisp and impatient, the tone of a man accustomed to obedience. "The timeline must be firm. Delays increase risk." Daniel answered, lower controlled, disturbingly calm. "October 31st works. She always stays late that night to close after the Halloween dinner service." There was a pause, then the sound of papers shifting. "What about witnesses?" Victor asked. Daniel's reply was immediate. "There won't be any. I'll make sure she's alone." Emma did not breathe for several seconds. The recording continued. A third voice entered, rough, uncertain. "This gas valve situation, if it leaks too much, someone could get hurt." Daniel exhaled sharply. "That's the point. Just loosen it enough so it builds slowly. It will look like faulty maintenance in an old building. Tragic accident. Insurance covers the rest." Silence followed, heavy and deliberate. Then Victor again. "And once she's gone, the transfer is automatic. Harbor Table moves under joint authority. We sell within 90 days. Clean exit." Emma stopped the audio. The room did not spin. She did not scream. Something far more dangerous settled over her instead. Clarity sharpened to a blade. The affair had been strategic. The poisoning had been calculated, but this was finality. An engineered explosion timed for a holiday evening when candles flickered and music masked mechanical sounds. Daniel had not simply wanted her weakened. He had wanted her erased. Outside her office, a server laughed at something trivial. A glass clinked against a counter. Life continued, unaware that its axis had tilted. Nathan Brooks had secured the recording through an informant who had grown uneasy about the arrangement. The man hired to tamper with the gas line had hesitated, had recorded a meeting for leverage, perhaps for survival. Nathan had moved quickly once he sensed the gravity. Emma replayed the critical lines once more, committing Daniel's tone to memory. There was no hesitation in his voice, no tremor of doubt. Only logistics. Halloween. October 31st, 3 weeks away. Emma leaned back slowly in her chair, staring at the ceiling, where faint water stains traced abstract shapes. Daniel had chosen symbolism without realizing it. Masks, costumes, illusion. He believed he was orchestrating the final act of a performance in which she played the unsuspecting wife. He believed the explosion would read as tragic misfortune, an unfortunate failure in an aging structure. He believed he would inherit sympathy. He had miscalculated. That evening, when Daniel returned home at 6:45, he appeared relaxed, almost buoyant. He kissed her cheek, asked about reservations for the upcoming Halloween event, mentioned a potential investor who might attend. His eyes searched her face, subtly measuring weakness. Emma smiled with quiet warmth and told him attendance was already near capacity. She even suggested he invite friends. The more witnesses, the better, she thought privately. The more documented the night, the clearer the contrast when it unraveled. After dinner, Daniel stepped onto the balcony to take a call. Emma followed silently, stopping just inside the doorway where the glass muffled sound, but not entirely. She caught fragments. It's set. Just confirm the timing. She'll be there. Alone. His silhouette against the city lights looked composed, decisive, convinced of victory. Emma stepped back into the apartment before he turned around. Her heart did not race. Fear had transformed into something structured, almost architectural. If Daniel wanted a staged accident, she would give him a stage. If he wanted witnesses, she would provide them. If he believed the gas line would be compromised, she would ensure it was not. Later that night, she contacted Laura Bennett with 3 words. It escalated. Laura arrived within the hour, listening to the recording in the quiet of Emma's kitchen, her expression tightening into professional resolve. "We move carefully," she said. "We let him believe the valve is loose. We control the line remotely. We gather every piece." Emma nodded once. 3 weeks. That was all Daniel believed he needed to end her life and claim her empire. 3 weeks were more than enough for Emma Collins to turn his design into evidence, his arrogance into confession, and his certainty into collapse. He had chosen the date. She would choose the ending. Emma did not dismantle the gas line. She reinforced it, fortified it, and then quietly installed a second layer of control that Daniel would never anticipate. 3 days after hearing the recording, she met a retired industrial engineer named David Walsh in the dim kitchen of Harbor Table after closing the overhead lights, casting long shadows over steel counters. David examined the main valve behind the stove with professional detachment, running his hand along the pipe where Daniel's hired contractor had already loosened the fitting slightly. It was subtle, dangerous, intentional. Emma stood beside him without flinching. "I need it secure," she said calmly, "and I need to be able to shut it off remotely." By midnight, David had installed a concealed motorized shut-off system linked to a secure application on Emma's phone, a silent guardian embedded within the infrastructure Daniel intended to weaponize. The original loosened valve was documented thoroughly by Laura Bennett's forensic unit before being tightened. Photographs, measurements, timestamps, everything preserved. The illusion of vulnerability would remain, but the threat itself had been neutralized. Daniel believed he was engineering disaster. In truth, he had constructed a controlled stage. In the days that followed, Emma refined the performance. She announced publicly that Harbor Table would host an elaborate Halloween dinner on October 31st, a themed evening with candlelit tables, seasonal tasting menus, and a late closing for private guests. She encouraged Daniel to invite potential investors to celebrate expansion plans. He responded with visible satisfaction, as if she were unknowingly accelerating his timeline. Lily texted frequently, alternating between sisterly affection and strategic curiosity about the event. Emma answered every message warmly, even suggesting Lily attend. If they wanted an audience, she would provide one. Meanwhile, Laura coordinated discreet surveillance. Undercover officers would be present as guests. Nathan Brooks arranged for Victor Hale's communications to be monitored under expanding legal grounds tied to financial conspiracy. Richard Hayes prepared sealed affidavits detailing the attempted poisoning and fraudulent transfer documents. Every piece moved into place with quiet precision. Emma's role required the most discipline. She had to remain believable, slightly tired, slightly trusting, completely unaware. At home, Daniel grew almost affectionate in anticipation. He spoke about future renovations, about selling at the right moment, about freedom from daily operations. "You deserve less stress," he would say, brushing a hand along her shoulder. "After Halloween, things will change." Emma met his eyes and nodded gently. "Yes," she agreed. "They will." Inside, her thoughts were no longer fragmented by pain. They were linear, focused, deliberate. One evening, while Daniel reviewed blueprints at the dining table, Emma stepped onto the balcony alone and looked out over the city lights flickering against Lake Michigan. Fear tried once more to surface, not for herself, but for the version of love she had once believed in. She allowed it a single breath. Then she exhaled and let it go. The woman who once built Harbor Table with borrowed funds and relentless work had survived harsher storms than betrayal. Daniel had mistaken kindness for fragility. He had mistaken silence for surrender. 3 days before Halloween, Daniel met with the contractor responsible for loosening the gas valve. Laura's team documented the exchange from a distance. Money changed hands. Instructions were repeated. Timing confirmed. October 31st. After 8:30 in the evening, Emma would be alone in the kitchen performing final checks before closing. That was the design. On the morning of Halloween, Emma woke at 6 without an alarm. She brewed her own coffee and poured Daniel's untouched cup into the sink without ceremony. The restaurant buzzed with preparations by noon pumpkins, arranged along the windows. Candles tested, staff briefed on the evening's extended hours. Guests would fill the dining room by 7. Daniel arrived shortly after 6:30, dressed sharply, confidence radiating from him like heat. He kissed her cheek and whispered, "Tonight changes everything." Emma smiled softly, her phone resting discreetly in the pocket of her black dress, the emergency shut-off application already open. Around them, tables filled with laughter and costume masks. Lily arrived just after 7:45. Her expression bright, unaware she was walking into a reckoning rather than a celebration. Victor Hale entered at 8, exactly his eyes scanning the room for opportunity. Daniel believed the stage was set for an accident. Emma knew it was set for exposure. At 8:28 in the evening, while candlelight flickered across masked faces and violins hummed softly from the corner quartet, Daniel Collins checked his watch for the 3rd time and excused himself from the table. Emma watched him move through the dining room with quiet certainty, the confidence of a man approaching the final act of a plan he believed flawless. The Halloween crowd laughed around him, unaware that they were seated inside a carefully engineered trap, though not the one Daniel imagined. In the kitchen, Daniel lingered near the rear stove, pretending to admire the plating of a pumpkin risotto while subtly reaching behind the stainless steel panel where the gas valve had been loosened days before. His fingers brushed the fitting, confirming what he believed to be vulnerability. He did not know that the pipe had already been secured, documented, and rendered harmless. He stepped back into the dining room with measured calm, giving Emma a faint nod that read like a silent countdown. Emma returned the look with composure and slipped her hand into her dress pocket, feeling the cool surface of her phone. The emergency shut-off application glowed softly on the screen, a final safeguard she would not need, but carried nonetheless. At 8:35, she rose from her seat and addressed the guests with a graceful smile. "Thank you for celebrating with us tonight," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Before dessert, I would like to share something personal about Harbor Table and its future." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Victor Hale leaned back in his chair, watchful. Lily's smile faltered, uncertainty creeping into her eyes. Emma signaled discreetly toward the far end of the room. The lights dimmed, not into darkness, but into focus. A projector screen descended slowly against the exposed brick wall behind her. The first image appeared. An email thread between Daniel Collins and Victor Hale dated 4 months earlier. Words illuminated in stark white against black. "Once she is compliant, the transfer will be seamless." A murmur rippled through the guests. Daniel stood abruptly. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharper than intended. Emma did not look at him. She advanced the slide. The lab report appeared next. "Ipecac syrup detected. Chronic exposure. 90 days. The room fell into stunned silence. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. Victor's posture stiffened. Emma's gaze finally met Daniel's. 3 months of poisoning, she said quietly. 3 months of strategic weakening. Daniel's face drained of color. "This is absurd," he snapped, but his voice cracked under the weight of evidence. Emma pressed play on the final recording. Victor's voice filled the room first, then Daniel's own words echoed unmistakably. "October 31st. She'll be alone. It will look like an accident. Gas leak. Insurance covers the rest." The silence afterward was absolute. Before Daniel could move, before Victor could form an excuse, Laura Bennett stepped forward from a nearby table, badge flashing under candlelight. "Daniel Collins, you are under arrest for attempted homicide, conspiracy to commit fraud, and aggravated assault." Officers emerged seamlessly from the crowd, hands firm but controlled. Lily began to cry, her mask slipping to the floor unnoticed. Victor attempted composure, but his eyes betrayed calculation unraveling into panic. Daniel stared at Emma as handcuffs closed around his wrists. "You set me up," he hissed. Emma shook her head slowly. "No, Daniel, you did that yourself." Outside, sirens pierced the Chicago night, red and blue lights reflecting against the restaurant windows like shattered glass. Guests whispered in disbelief as officers escorted Daniel and Victor toward the door. Lily remained seated, trembling, caught between loyalty and consequence. Emma stood alone at the center of the dining room, not triumphant, not broken, but resolute. The stage Daniel had built for her destruction had become the stage for his exposure. He had planned an explosion. Instead, the truth detonated. The courtroom felt colder than the Chicago winter waiting outside, though it was only mid-December, when Emma Collins took her seat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap posture, composed in a way that masked the long road behind her. The trial had lasted 3 weeks each day, peeling back another layer of Daniel's calculated deception, each piece of evidence reinforcing what she had already known the moment she chose strategy over anger. The jury had not needed long. Truth, when structured carefully, rarely does. Daniel stood at the defendant's table in a gray suit that no longer carried the authority he once believed it did. His shoulders slightly curved inward, his confidence replaced by something brittle. Victor Hale sat 2 seats away, expression controlled but hollow. The architecture of power stripped down to exposed intent. Across the aisle, Lily avoided Emma's gaze entirely. Her presence quieter now, diminished not by punishment yet, but by realization. Judge Harrington's voice cut cleanly through the room. The charges were read again, each word landing with deliberate weight. Attempted homicide, financial conspiracy, fraud, aggravated assault through poisoning. The language was formal, clinical, but Emma could still hear the echo of Daniel's voice in that recording, the calm certainty with which he had planned her death. The contrast settled into her chest, not as pain, but as distance. When the sentence was delivered, there was no dramatic reaction. 12 years without parole for the first 8. Financial restitution exceeding $500,000. Full restoration of ownership rights to Harbor Table. Victor received 8 years along with permanent disqualification from executive roles in the state. Lily's case unfolded differently. Her cooperation had reduced her charges, but the consequences remained. Probation, mandatory testimony, a life recalibrated by choices she could not undo. Emma did not smile. She did not cry. She simply exhaled. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered voices layered with questions about betrayal, resilience, survival. Emma paused only briefly, her coat pulled close against the wind. "I did not win anything," she said calmly. "I protected what was mine." Then she stepped into the waiting car without looking back. The weeks that followed were quieter than she expected. Harbor Table reopened after minor renovations, its interior warmer, stronger, subtly transformed. The gas system had been entirely replaced. The kitchen redesigned, not out of fear, but out of intention. Nothing in her world would remain vulnerable by accident again. Customers returned, some out of loyalty, others drawn by the story that had spread through the city like a slow, burning fire. Emma worked every day, not as someone rebuilding from loss, but as someone refining what had always been hers. The staff watched her differently now, not with sympathy, but with a kind of grounded respect. She had not collapsed. She had recalibrated. And in doing so, she had redefined the space itself. Harbor Table was no longer just a restaurant. It was proof. One morning in early spring, nearly 6 months after the trial, Emma stood alone on the lake shore just before sunrise, the horizon painted in muted gold and pale blue. The air was sharp, clean, carrying the distant rhythm of water against stone. She held nothing in her hands, no evidence, no documents, no reminders of the past, only stillness. She thought of Daniel, confined now within walls that mirrored the limits he had tried to impose on her. She thought of Victor, stripped of influence, reduced to consequence. She thought of Lily somewhere in the city, living with the quiet weight of understanding. None of them occupied her thoughts for long, because what remained was not them. It was her. Emma turned back toward the city as the sun lifted fully above the skyline, light spilling across glass and steel, illuminating everything without hesitation. The same city that had nearly witnessed her destruction now held her future unchanged, but newly defined. She walked with steady steps, not faster, not slower, simply forward. The betrayal had not ended her story. It had revealed it. And for the first time in a long time, Emma Collins was not reacting to what had been done to her. She was choosing what came next. From a psychological and behavioral perspective, this story is not just about betrayal. It is about power perception and awareness. Experts in relationship dynamics often emphasize that manipulation rarely begins with obvious harm. It starts with subtle control, emotional conditioning, and the gradual erosion of a person's confidence. Emma's turning point was not revenge, but clarity. She shifted from reacting emotionally to observing strategically, and that single change allowed her to reclaim control of both her life and her future. In many real-world cases, the difference between being a victim and becoming a survivor lies in documentation, patience, and timing. Emma did not win because she was stronger in anger. She won because she was stronger in discipline. That is the deeper lesson here. Awareness is protection. evidence is power, and self-trust is the foundation that prevents others from rewriting your story. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to support the channel by liking and subscribing. It helps bring more powerful stories like this to light and builds a community that values strength, clarity, and resilience. And before you go, leave a comment with this phrase: "Stay sharp,